What is the value of the ratio? B is to A. Hence prove the relationship. Label points A, B, C, D, and E. Let O be the center of the inscribed circle. Join line O, E. Also, join line A, D, which is the diagonal of the square. Since angle CB, D equals 75 degrees. It implies that angle CD, B equals 90 degrees, minus angle CB, D, which equals 15 degrees. Hence, angle ED, O equals 45 degrees minus 15 degrees, which equals to 30 degrees. By Pythagoras' theorem, the square of line A, D equals the product of 2 times the square of line C, D, which equals 2 times the square of 8. Take the square root of the equation. This implies that line AD equals the square root of the product of 2 and the square of 8, which equals 8 times square root of 2 in centimeters. It follows that line OD equals half line AD, which equals 4 times the square of 2 in centimeters. Also, line OE equals to R, the radius of the circle, which equals 4 centimeters. Consider triangle DOE. Use cosine rule. The square of line OE equals the sum of the square of line DE and the square of line OD minus 2 times the product of line ED and line OD times cosine 30 degrees. Let line ED equals y and substitute values. We obtained an equation as shown on the screen. Combine like terms and rearrange terms in one side of the equation. Square y minus 4 times y times the square root of 6 plus 16 equals to 0. Use the general quadratic equation formula. Y equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times the product of a and c, all divided by 2 times a, where a equals 1, b equals negative 4 times the square root of 6 and c equals 16. Substitute values and we obtained an equation as shown on the screen. Simplify. Y equals half of 4 times the square root of 6 plus or minus 4 times the square root of 2. Simplify and we have that y equals the product of 2 and the sum of the square root of 6 and the square root of 2, or the product of 2 and square root of 6 minus square root of 2. Recall that y equals to line ED. It implies that line ED equals the product of 2 and the sum of the square root of 6 and the square root of 2, or the product of 2 and square root of 6 minus square root of 2. Line ED is not equals the product of 2 and the sum of the square root of 6 and the square root of 2 in centimeters. It is because line ED is less than line OE, which is less than line OD. Hence, line ED equals the product of 2 and the square root of 6 minus the square root of 2 in centimeters. This implies that label point K. Join line OK. Hence, line OK equals R, which equals to 4 centimeters. Consider triangle ODK. Let line D, K equals X. Use cosine rule. The square of OK equals the sum of the square of OD and the square of X minus 2 times the product X and line OD times cosine 30 degrees. Substitute values and we obtained an equation as shown on the screen. Simplify it to have that 16 equals the sum of 32 and the square of X minus 4 times the product of X and the square root of 6. Rearrange terms in one side of the equation. Square of X minus 4 times X times the square root of 6 plus 32 minus 16 equals to 0. Simplify further to obtain a new equation as shown on the screen. Use the general quadratic equation formula as shown, where A equals 1, B equals negative 4 times the square root of 6 and C equals 16. Substitute values and we have that we obtained an equation for the value of X as shown on the screen. It implies that X equals the product of 2 and the square root of 6 plus or minus the square root of 2. After simplification of values. Recall that X equals line D, K. It follows that line D, K equal the product of 2 and the square root of 6 plus or minus the square root of 2. But line D, K is not equals to 2 times the square root of 6 minus the square root of 2 with respect to the given condition. It implies that line D, K equals the product of 2 and the sum of the square root of 6 and the square root of 2 in centimeters. But line D, K equals the sum of line E, D and line E, K. It implies that 2 times the sum of the square root of 6 and the square root of 2 equals the sum of 2 times the square root of 6 minus the square root of 2 and line EK. Make line EK the subject of the formula. We have that line EK equals the product of 4 the square root of 2 centimeters. After simplification of substituted values. Recall that line EK equals to B. This follows that B equals 4 times the square root of 2 centimeters and A equals 8 centimeters. Therefore, the ratio B is to A equals half the square root of 2. Solution to question 2. For the ratio B is to A equals half the square root of 2 which equals 1 divided by the square root of 2. By trigonometric identity for special angles, cosine 45 degrees equals to 1 divided by square root of 2. Also, the inverse of the cosine 45 degrees equals the inverse of 1 divided by the square root of 2 which equals to the square root of 2. The result equals the inverse of the ratio B is to A which equals to secant 45 degrees. Therefore, the inverse of the ratio B is to A equals to secant 45 degrees. Shown.